Yes, I would agree. I think one thing about these exhibitions of private collections, you say the master drawings is having a hard time finding reviewers for it. The newspapers sometimes review them with a bit of a tone of not just a judgment.
Yeah.
is often expressed in these newspaper articles because these are objects that belong to a private person. And the newspaper sometimes takes a sort of, I'm not going to say Marxist or censorious position towards it, but they do take a sort of odd tone sometimes in the reviews there, which I think is extremely short-sighted in the sense that most of these exhibitions that are being done by these museums, let's face it, the museums are doing them under somewhat of a contractual basis with the collectors. Some of these objects may enter these institutions where they're being exhibited. Obviously, it's to the museum's advantage. But what's critical is that the collector has agreed to exhibit these things for a period of 4 to 6 months often. Sometimes it travels much longer. And this allows the broad public to see works of art that otherwise are not available. And I think that has been the most positive development in the museums overcoming their distaste for exhibiting private collections.
And I think that that's the point that is so often overlooked, that these things are not accessible, and it's only through exhibitions that we have the chance to enjoy them. And maybe perhaps one of the reasons why we don't have as many exhibitions of drawings from Budapest or whatever is that more people get on the plane now and go to Budapest and see them.
You can see them in Budapest, but you couldn't see these drawings.
That's right. That's
in a New York apartment.
That's right.
Unless they came to Smith or to Washington. But I'm just saying that that's a very important thing. It has also contributed to the popularity of Old Master and 19th century drawings as a collecting genre, and has stimulated the whole interest of the collecting world in a way in the last 30 years that's unparalleled, I think, in the history of collecting drawings.
And it stimulates both the market and the scholarship and
the museum's interests, and thus the public's appreciation for these drawings.
Collections development.
Yeah, it's a remarkable phenomenon, I think.
Andrew, do you want to say, because I know that you were quite instrumental in helping to establish the policy at the National Gallery of Art for exhibitions of private collections. Do you want to say a little bit about what the policy is and how what the concerns or issues were in the discussion?
A little bit. I think that in the case of the gallery, what's true for every museum, I think, being basically publicly funded, is true in spades at the National Gallery, because we're under certain legal restrictions from the federal government, and one of them is that we are not allowed to use public money for private gain. That's kind of, a pointed way of focusing the issue that if you think that the exhibition of a private collection of anything, of baseball cards, is going to raise their value, possibly, and I don't agree with that position, but if you think that that might be the case, then you have to think very carefully about what is it that benefits the public from this. And of course, the exhibition of the works of art is a great benefit to the public. Beyond that, at the National Gallery, we try to recognize that there are 14 ways to skin a cat. And so there are lots of different ways that the relationship between the collector and the museum can be beneficial to both parties. And if it's an exhibition of works of art of the type that we collect, because we're not a universal museum, we collect American and European works of art from the late Middle Ages to the present, so we don't collect Asian works of art and so forth. But if it's an exhibition of the type of works that we collect, then we expect that some works of art somehow will come to the museum. Perhaps they've already come. And frequently, in the case of the present collector, when we had her exhibition at the National Gallery, we included a number of works of art which she had already given to the museum. So it's not something that has to happen, you know, way in the future. But we do expect somehow that in the long range, the museum and thus the public will benefit from the type of works of art which are included in the exhibition. And then we try to let that float. That's something that's very flexible. What does that mean? There's no number, there's no amount of value, there's no restriction, but something which benefits the museum in the long run. And usually, by the time we have an exhibition of a private collection, then very much like what Suzanne was saying this morning about a couple of her collectors, usually benefit has already come to the museum. Usually some of the works of art have already been presented to the museum or have already been committed or partially committed to the museum. Beyond that, I think it's very much of a question of personal trust. And personal trust, which it may sound terribly old-fashioned, but, and occasionally I've gotten into trouble here, but not with the present collector, but with, in other cases where you trust that you're dealing, you know, in an honest and straightforward and understanding fashion. And it's better not to try to pin everything down, but you have to know who you're dealing with on both sides. And I think that's where one of our sister institutions to the south of here has gotten into trouble because, you know, sometimes if you try to, I'm trying to arrange an exhibition right now of a private collection of paintings and drawings and sculpture, and thinking of sharing it with one of our sister institutions, and I just am astonished by the kind of business-like approach that, you know, we need to have, you know, this and this and this and this, a certain percentage, a certain quantity of dollar worth or so forth. I don't think that's the way to go. I think if you get into that kind of conversation, then you want to kind of back away and think again about who you're dealing with. So I'm optimistic, I'm trusting, and I think that it's better to make your arrangements on the collector side with the museum that you trust, and on the museum side with the collector that you trust. And then I feel, you know, 99 times out of 100, that's going to work the best way.
I think that's true. I think it particularly, though, I think in different collecting fields, I think sometimes you want a much more strict and business-like approach to that from the institution's point of view. However, I mean, this is going to sound sort of sappy, but I really do think that in the old master drawings and 19th century drawings field, you are dealing with a kind of person who's very interested in the history of collecting, very interested in art history, very interested in institutions, very interested in the whole process, not just their own particular private interest in forming a collection. And thus, I think that those persons perhaps are more likely. Did I say the right thing again? I think that in our field, those people are much more sympathetic to the institution's concerns than, say, other fields where, first of all, the amount of money involved in contemporary painting and sculpture and modern painting and sculpture is a very different kind of thing. But I think in this world, there's a very cordial relationship between most of these collectors and the institutions which they're attached to.
I think that's right, and I think it's one of the things which I feel very proud about our field, that is the field of collecting European and American art, if I can put it that way, that, and I've tried to explain many times to European colleagues that there is this wonderful phenomenon in America which is not in other fields. If you collect postage stamps, that's a real thing to collect. I don't know of any museum that expects you to give your stamp collection when you die or something like that. If you collect minerals, marbles, comic books, you know, many areas which are quite serious areas of collecting, the system has not developed of a kind of mutual expectation that some of the things which you've collected will come to reside in a museum. But in the field of art, this has become a kind of phenomena, not universal, but it is a kind of phenomena, and I'm very proud of it. I think it's great that people involved, to take forward what Mark is saying, people involved in collecting especially drawings and prints and rare books, the graphic arts, have a sense that, you know, in the old-fashioned, simple way, you know, that they have a certain duty to give back. They have a certain duty to support the museums which they support and which they believe in. And I think that's wonderful. I think that's a marvelous aspect of generosity which has infected the field of collecting art. And whether it's, you know, giving back to a particular museum that you support or, you know, multiple museums, most of the donors to the National Gallery are donors to multiple institutions. And that starts with our greatest donors, the Mellon family and so forth. And I think that if you have gone through a period of collecting, you feel those pulls towards multiple places, your heirs, your charities, your college museum, for example, your National Gallery, I hope, and you know, your municipal museum or other museums. So we all feel this kind of pull towards donating to various museums, and I think that's not something to avoid. That's something to relish and something to think about. And it's something which, as you asked about the...
To celebrate the its public benefit.
In multiple ways. In multiple ways.
Now, before I open it up to questions from the audience, I want to just turn just ever so slightly away from art of collecting. For the younger members of the audience, I think something that a museum, a college museum of art, can do better than our large national museums is that you can bring in students and encourage the next generation. And I think it's wonderful what Suzanne has done here with her course and bringing the drawings alive to students and then encouraging them to do their own exhibition and labels and text. As a product of that system and internships, I would just encourage anyone, any of the students here in the audience who are considering a career in the arts, is do it, get involved. And recently we had, every 2 years, the international curators around the world, we meet. And one of our panel discussions at our last meeting in Vienna at the end of May was a discussion how to encourage more people to join our field, how to create internships, curatorial training programs. And we are all committed to doing that at the Rijksmuseum, at Washington, I hope occasionally with dealers. So please do get involved, all the young people out in the audience. So that's my final plea. Now we're happy to take questions from anyone.